Well, we begin this Sunday with a little piece of history in Orangeburg County. A few days ago, leaders there making that county just the second in South Carolina to approve a hate crime ordinance. The first, of course, was Richland County back in June. Now Orangeburg County leaders saying that they actually used that as a piece of inspiration to do what they have done. So we want to welcome you in to Connect to the Capitol on this Sunday morning. We now have 2 counties in the state of South Carolina, more than a dozen cities and towns in South Carolina that have passed and approved hate crime ordinances in their particular regions. All of this, of course, being done because there is no statewide law here in South Carolina. Wyoming is the other state that does not have a state hate crime law as well. We have talked about this at length, Dave Wilson and Catherine Glenn Foster, over the past few months. We're going to keep talking about it because of these types of things. So Orangeburg County, it's a misdemeanor offense, $500 fine, up to 30 days in jail, and counseling, things of that nature that come along with some misdemeanor offenses. I think we're going to see more of this. I really do.
Yeah, I definitely expect to see more of this because right now we have this patchwork system of zip code, county line kind of justice, where if you're living in one county, you get an enhanced penalty for a hate crime, but in another county you might not. And this is important because even though you can't use the law necessarily to change someone's heart, it is a teacher, and the law can make sure that someone that hateful crime can't hide behind the lack of a law. But with that said, there's a lot of questions about hate crimes laws as well.
There are, and we're going to talk about those as well after we kind of get through the meat of this matter. As we said, Richland County was the first. We've already had one person charged in this last month in July. Jonathan Felkel was his name. There was a shooting incident in the Spring Valley community. Gentleman just waiting for his ride for work who lived in the Spring Valley community, and authorities have it caught on camera, surveillance camera video, that Felkel shot a rifle, intimidating this man who had, like I said, just waiting for work at 5:30 in the morning.
It's interesting when you actually can watch the footage here, and you see the guy's getting ready to pull up, and you recognize the fact that here's a person who lives in the neighborhood who is simply waiting for a ride, and someone pulls out a gun to shoot at him. It's a gated community. He lives in the gated community. He is stepping outside of that so that the person who is there to pick him up does not have to go through the gate. And that is a place that you have to begin to ask the question, what has to be done with this? Because as we've had a discussion about this before, it reminds me of the upstream, downstream issues that go on because we're creating laws right now to deal with heart-related issues here, and that is, are you willing to turn around and recognize this other person and decide, based upon the fact that 1, they're standing outside your neighborhood, and 2, they're of a different race, that your solution to that is to pull out a rifle and shoot at them? That's just wrong.
There's a lot of problems there that have nothing to do with the law. We did hear from the gentleman who thankfully was not wounded by that gunfire, but just a couple days ago, for the first time, we heard from him and his attorney, Tyler Bailey, and they called a news conference to talk about that horrible experience and saying to state lawmakers, hey, let's do something statewide. Good on the county for doing the ordinance, but how about statewide? Let's take a listen real quick.
It will forever change my life and my family's own. I was shot at standing, waiting to go to work at 5:30 in the morning, and I feel that there's something should be done.
He gets up every morning to wake up and wait for his supervisor to take him to work. That morning, that's what he was doing. He was waiting, and that's when he saw the shooter, who stopped his car, looked him dead into the eyes. They never met each other before. There was no exchange of words at all.
It's frightening. 25 seconds there boiled down into a very frightening incident. Jarvis McKenzie, the man who was shot at, says he's a different guy now. I listened to the whole news conference. He said he's looking out the window when he hears noises. He sometimes doesn't leave the house unless the sun is up. He doesn't. This is traumatizing, and all because of his race.
That's exactly right. And it isn't just traumatizing for him, but for an entire community.
Yeah.
A community that's traditionally been marginalized, disenfranchised, victimized. So for a lot of people, the hate crimes law is a great way to come in to feel good, to provide that relief, to let people feel heard, to let them feel seen, vindicated maybe. So there's a lot of good that can come from this, but then there are also questions. We've heard of questions from the GOP, et cetera. My real fundamental issue when I'm looking at these, it goes back to the fundamentals. It goes back to the upstream downstream question. And so when you have a hate crimes law, you're taking the same action because every criminal offense, every violent crime, not talking about self-defense here, it's an act of hate. It's an act that just de facto comes with it hatred and vitriol. And so what a hate crimes law does is say that some reasons for a violent act are worse than others. And you can see that there's an argument to be made out there that when you have a systemic problem like racism, like the systemic racism that's been endemic in our country for centuries, that it's almost backwards to say that when you punish the one person who's grown up in this system, that in fact they deserve the worst punishment when they're arguably a little bit less at fault individually. The system is at fault. And so we have to do something.
And that's the upstream downstream question here. To get a better idea of what that actually means, we were watching a documentary from years ago called The Best of Enemies with Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley during the 1968 debates. One television network wasn't doing so well, so they decided to, instead of doing the national coverage, they had two people on two different sides debating the issue. And there was a section of that talked about the violence that was happening in communities where people were going through, breaking windows, looting stores, and there's an issue that was happening there. The Republican response at the convention was, we need better laws.
More policing.
More policing.
It was more policing, more, security on the streets.
Right, which is a downstream issue. And to help you understand that, when you are dealing with issues of how people feel about things, what is their attitude, what is their heart in something, which is really what a hate crimes law is meant to address. What is the reason for, you have demonstrated a level of hate in what it is that you have done. So that issue that exists way up here, upstream, has now fallen down to, this is the way we're going to respond to things. We're going to turn around and we're going to threaten people. We're going to fire guns at them. We're going to break through windows. We're going to loot. And so most people feel like the response needs to be, we need better laws. And the reality is we need better hearts, if you really want to talk about the issue. And that's the part that I think is the feel-good part. We're saying something has to be done.
And something does.
Right.
But this may not be the answer, because we're trying to change hearts and minds simply through the law, and could end up actually exacerbating and making this problem worse by creating kind of a martyr system. It's like when you're on the highway and you're driving, say, 80. You're speeding, you could get pulled over, we all know it, but everyone's going 80. And then the police officer pulls you over. That's kind of the system that we can create here when we take a whole group of people with racist beliefs and perhaps violent tendencies, maybe listening to the same online agitators, growing up in the same system. And then we say, you who acted out on it, you get punished worse because of this system. And then that can create an even worse environment for all those other people out there, where they may start to feel even more deeply. It kind of drives them underground. Instead of fixing the hearts and minds and creating the relationships that actually solve these problems. Which
is, I think, sometimes where you have certain groups politically who have decided, listen, I have a problem with this, because now you're turning around and saying it's people, quote unquote, who look like me versus people who look like you. And that sort of polarization is the negative impact that can come from this kind of legislation. Do you believe like I do? Do you have the same faith that I do? If not, then where's the problem going to be here if I turn around and say, well, my faith says this? So,
right. And I will say this Jarvis McKenzie case is, to the extent that there's a cut and dry case, it's this
It's
one.
never been simpler.
Right. It
It's
has
never
been simpler. But with that said, again, what are we looking at here? The judge set bail and set a high bail. Which
he hasn't gotten out of jail.
Absolutely.
The accused shooter.
Right. And so, but he can do that without the hate crimes law. That just provides up to $500, up to 30 days in jail, which is not a major deterrent
not at
when
all.
you can get more for speeding.
And right now, it's worth noting the U.S. Attorney's Office here in South Carolina is reviewing the case for the potential of prosecuting it at the federal level. Right. And like you said, it's pretty cut and dried.
And that's a completely different level of the case.
Absolutely. And
completely different.
That there, punishable by up to 10 years, I believe, in prison.
Right.
So that's where the serious business comes at the federal level. We will have a little more talk about this in the next segment. Congresswoman Nancy Mace was in Columbia for a Washington Night Forum sponsored by South Carolina Chamber of Commerce. A number of politicians were. Some of them maybe running for governor. They had some things to say. She did weigh in on hate crimes and crime victims in general. That's when we come back.
If we could only implement and follow the policies and laws we have today, we're not doing that. We're not following mandatory minimums. I mean, you can put all the fines and fees and prison time you want, but when you have prosecutors, solicitors, attorney generals, assistant attorney generals that are letting people off for one day in jail.
That was Congresswoman Nancy Mace the other night at a forum here in Columbia. Ralph Norman also there running for governor. That was her response to whether she would support a hate crime law. If elected governor, would she sign it into law? She said she would, but with those conditions. Hey, let's actually enforce the penalties that are on the book. So in a roundabout way, it was more about protecting victims of crime in general.
Right.
And holding those accountable that commit said crimes, because that is her crusade right now.
Right, exactly.
Generally, it's been against violence against women and sexual violence.
No, I think the real crusade has been against Alan Wilson.
And Alan. She didn't mention him by name in that.
No, but she did mention the Attorney General.
She did.
And I think that has been from the moment that she prior to the moment that she stepped foot on the floor of the U.S. House in February and had that whole hour-long display of whatever it was that she wanted to get out there and put out there. This has been Nancy Mace running against Alan Wilson for governor. Now, are there real issues that need to be addressed? Absolutely.
Yeah, there are.
And so that is a place where this case has now come up, and the implications of that, you had Brian Musgrave, who was one of the people that she accused. Sued
for libel.
And Judge Gergel, the federal judge out of the Charleston area, basically said, "Hey, listen, my hands are tied here." She said it on the U.S. House floor, and there's nothing I can do because there are laws that are in place to protect a level of speech for members of Congress while they're saying it on the floor of the U.S. House.
Although there are exceptions when you pre-say it on social
media. Which
media.
she did,
right.
And after, too.
Exactly, right. And so there's some wiggle room there, but you're right. There is a need for improvement. There are changes that do need to be made. We all know that. You look at the rape test kits. You look at all kinds of issues, not to mention, going back to segment 1, those hearts and minds that we need to continue to just educate so that we do away with hate, whether it's racially based or whether it's sexually gender based, domestic violence, all kinds of issues there. But on the other hand, to try to say that our Attorney General is do nothing is a bridge.
We've never agreed with that.
Way too far.
No. We know what he's been doing.
Yeah, he has been on the front lines, making sure that children, that women are protected, that our state is protected from the kinds of violent and sexual crimes that have been popping up, especially some of these online issues.
Yeah, the cyber crimes against children, human trafficking, sex trafficking. He has task force set up that deal with these issues. Now, you mentioned the speech on the floor, on the House floor.
Right.
One of the other men named in that, Bowman, Eric Bowman, also named during that. He was in court the other day, virtually. That's why you see it on the screen there. He is another one who was labeled a predator in that House speech. Well, here he is in court. This was on Wednesday, facing domestic violence charges, linked to an incident from 9 years ago, 2016, a video of presumably him surfaced. And there was, if you've watched the video, it's troubling to watch.
Yeah.
We all watched it. It's hard to watch.
Yeah.
There's a lot of coarse language. There is violence in the video. I can't tell if it's him, but that's what these charges are based on. Does this lend some semblance of credibility to these claims that Nancy Mace continues to make against these men?
I would argue no.
Okay.
I mean, just because someone did something 9 years
Doesn't
ago,
mean,
yeah, let's prosecute that. Let's hold him accountable for that. If in fact it is him, let's get justice there for his wife. But that does not necessarily mean that these other claims are also true.
Or these other men that are named are guilty by association.
Right.
And yet, the courts, the legal system versus the court of public opinion, and that's where Nancy is going with this right now. Nancy Mace is not putting this on trial in court. She's doing it in the court of public opinion. We're talking about it on the air this Sunday morning. It is part of the campaign speeches that she gives, and it is about how do you start swaying people's minds towards, are we being tough on crime and not tough on crime? And when videos surface like this one, and it is hard to watch. It is very difficult to watch. It is very violent. It is the type of abuse that definitely puts more than an R rating on a movie, that's for sure. And this is the sort of thing that makes people question, is what she's saying actually true? There's nothing that says it is, but it sure does lead to that question.
And it's truly sickening. I think all of us can, especially anyone who's lived through it, it's absolutely heartbreaking. But on the other hand, she's trying to lean into this once an abuser, always an abuser mentality, and that's simply not the way our justice system works.
It's captured the moment that's being prosecuted.
Right.
It's being captured. We delving into using this as a campaign issue. We do have another poll that came out in the governor's race. If we can show that graphic real quick, the latest poll. This came out just a couple days ago. The Mace campaign pushing it out, done by Meeting Street Branding and Research. They're out of Charleston. Nancy Mace in the lead in this one. Similar numbers to the one we saw about a month ago, where it was just flip-flop, where Wilson was on top.
Right.
Everybody else falling in line, essentially where they were in the last poll. But again, I think like you said a month ago, this is just a snapshot in time at this point.
And I think you're also looking at the fact that, again, you add the, I'm adding the numbers up real quickly. I think we're looking at roughly 62% of people.
Undecided.
It's 38%. Means a solid third of people
don't know.
Do not have a clue right now. And that is not unusual at this stage of the campaign. I mean, we are still 10 months out from the South Carolina Republican primary, where we will select who is going to be the gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side. The Democrats will do the same thing at the same time.
If they get some candidates.
They have at least
they have one.
But that's a whole other thing for another day. But this is where, when you look at this, poll numbers show us where do people feel like things are today. And you also have to ask the real question. Who did the poll? I mean, we sit there when we were talking about the new poll numbers.
Yeah.
We asked the question, who did the poll? Because poll numbers are not just some generic thing that's out there. They're actually part of what a campaign uses to say, hey, listen, we're moving the ball forward. We're seeing how far we've gotten. And so when we ask that question, when Brian turns around and says this was done by Meeting Street, that is to help you better understand, and how we help to discuss with you on a Sunday morning. You got to look and see who's doing these numbers.
Yeah.
All right, coming up next, we talked about prosecution. We talked about prosecutors. Well, there's a race for Attorney General that's going to be going on. One of those candidates entered the race officially. We're going to talk about that next.
We've got to do a better job of prosecuting child pornography cases, and we will do a better job, and that is on all of us. I'm going to advocate for legislation that makes child trafficking and child rape a death penalty offense.
David Pasco announcing this past week that he is running for Attorney General as a Republican. We knew he was entering the race. He made it clear, but when we spoke last week, this was just the official anointing of that decision here in a series of events that he had, first in the Low Country, that was on Monday, and then he also was in the Midlands too throughout the course of the week, talking about corruption, talking about predators, talking about doing a better job. Again, I kind of view that as a somewhat of a shot at Alan Wilson, who we think is doing a fine job going after online predators.
Yes.
Can you always do better? Sure.
Right.
Could you have harsher penalties? Sure. And he went for one there with that statement that he made, death penalty.
Exactly.
Death penalty in South Carolina has been limited to the actual killing of another person.
Yep.
This would open that up to a very different set of criteria. What it takes to prove that someone actually committed a crime that killed another person is a high bar to reach. This then goes back to what are the issues that have led up to child pornography issues, child sex trafficking, and all of those things. You're going to get a lot of people who are probably watching, having your coffee right now on a Sunday morning going, you daggum right, we should turn around and do that, because that's a knee-jerk reaction that you've got to start asking the question, is the death penalty the solution to this? He's going to push for it as Attorney General, but keep in mind, he's not a member of the legislature.
And hasn't been elected yet.
It has not been elected. There are 170 men and women in the South Carolina legislature, and the Attorney General is not one of them. So the Attorney General can propose concepts, propose what legislation should look like, but it's got to go through the House and the Senate before it can ever become law. And guess whose signature goes on that? Not the Attorney General.
Governor.
It's the governor.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when you're looking at expanding the death penalty in that way, that would be a huge step that brings in a lot of questions legally in terms of process, in terms of expense. And then you start to question, you have this knee-jerk reaction. You may think, well, we don't like this, and it's something that we
Nobody
all... Right, we can all call out as up there with the worst possible crimes you can commit. But is it going to have a deterrent effect? Is it going to actually save any kids or anyone at all? That's the real question here. What would we get out of it other than, again, this kind of feel-good pat on the back? Okay, we've done away with one bad guy, but how many more are out there, and what is actually best for our state?
And I think the flip side of this is you're taking a former Democrat prosecutor, David Pascoe,
who jumped across the aisle,
who is now a ruby red Republican, who has now figured out how to campaign on Republican talking points. This is campaigning, which is different than governing.
It absolutely is. Speaking of governing and lawmaking and people that whoever is AG will want to push for whatever their legislation is, that's changing too. We're going to talk about that quickly when we come back. Welcome back to Connect to the Capitol. As we get out of here, we're talking about some more changes at the State House. Representative Chris Murphy out of Dorchester County resigning effective immediately from the House this past week. He was absent for much of this legislative session anyway, dealing with some health issues and was not shy about saying also some alcohol rehab issues over the last year or two, and stepping away from the House after being elected 15 years ago. So that's now 3 resignations in the House in about a week's time. Right. RJ May being another. Obviously, we know why, facing federal porn charges. But that's 3 names, which means 3 new people are coming into the House in January.
And as we talked about the other week, Roger Nutt, the senator, newly elected senator out of Spartanburg, had been a member of the South Carolina House, won a state Senate seat against Lee Bright. It's another name that's going to come up as we have a discussion as we go further on this. But Representative Bobby Cox out of Greenville County, who lives in Nutt's district, has said that he is going to resign his seat in the South Carolina House to devote full time to run for that seat. Now, the timing on all of this is so that elections can happen around the same time. Special elections are going to be happening December 23rd. Merry Christmas.
Before Christmas.
Yeah.
To somebody who's going to try to figure out how they can get it.
Well, someone's got to be seated that second week of January.
Exactly.
So you have to do it. But this comes at a time when we already had a big change.
13 new senators.
13 new senators in January. Now we're going to have some more and some new House members.
Right.
The dynamic is changing at the State House.
The fresh start has been undercut by all of these changes. And so instead of being able to focus on these statewide reforms, like judicial reform, like protecting children and all these other issues that are coming up, instead there's been a lot more focus than we had hoped for on things like scandal management and filling seats.
Yeah, people getting their feet wet in the legislative process that are new to the process. That's all we got on this one. That's all the time we have. We could talk about that one for about 10 more minutes or more. But thank you again, as always, joining us every week here on Connect to the Capitol. And we'll see you again next Sunday.
Have a great Sunday.
Take care.